Call Stuart Smith.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Well, it's a pleasure to speak on the Animal Welfare Amendment Bill, and I was one of the new members to the Select Committee and unfortunately didn't go through any of the process with this bill. So I commend the members of the Select Committee for the fine job that they've done. Agriculture underpins our economy and, in fact, it pays for our way of life. We wouldn't enjoy the same standard of living that we enjoy now if it wasn't for the cow and the sheep in particular. So I think we, to a large extent, ride on their backs in terms of our economic well-being. It earns $25 billion from livestock and it contributes to our economy. So it's absolutely huge in terms of New Zealand's GNP. And I've used the term GNP deliberately. Too often we focus on GDP. Actually, GNP is how we pay our way in the world, and it's gross national product for anyone who's not familiar with the term. And I think I'd like to see a lot more focus on that term. Mr Speaker, there's been a lot, animal welfare is absolutely vital, but I think PETA, which is the People for Ethical Treatment of Animals, currently running a campaign in Australia, Mr Speaker, which does their cause no good. In their latest campaign, they claim 25% of the world's wool is grown in Australia and it's made from 100% cruelty. Now that is just a ridiculous statement, and I agree wholeheartedly with the Victorian Farmers Federation who said the campaign denigrates, offends, belittles and insults every Australian's intelligence. And I think while we care very deeply about animal welfare, to take it to that level in a campaign really just runs the risk of putting everyone offside from their particular argument. And if you keep running into a crowded theatre calling fire, people won't listen to you for very long after that. So I think they're not doing themselves any good. New Zealand is in fact ranked first equal in the world for animal welfare, and that's fantastic. It's great, but that doesn't mean we should rest on our laurels. We should always attempt to improve. And I think that trade is so vital, and it was mentioned by the previous speaker, I think. Trade, we are a trading nation, we're a niche producer, and we sell into niche markets, and we actually command a premium for our products. And the people who buy our products paying a little more than they buy from others is based around things like our animal welfare. So they do care about that. It's not something necessarily they do a lot of research on, but if it comes up, certainly they do care about it. And while animal welfare hasn't been a big issue in Asia, the Asian market is becoming an increasingly important market for lots of our goods. But in time, we've seen a distinct move in or change in values around the environment in Asia, and I believe we will see the same thing with animal welfare. So it's incumbent upon us to have really good rules around that, and this bill really does go a long way towards that. 68% of New Zealand households own a pet. So by number, while we're talking, and most of the focus has been on farm animals, by number of population, most people's contact with animals is with the family pet. And we shouldn't forget that in this discussion. As my colleague said earlier, dogs in particular, not only do they damage humans, which we often see when there's a dog attack, they also attack other dogs quite often and are often trained to be vicious. And so this bill deals with a lot of those issues, and I think I commend the committee for dealing with it in that way, and the Minister. And this bill seeks to amend the Animal Welfare Act 1999, and it brings a higher degree of transparency to the Act, and I think that's much needed. It's a much greater enforceability and increases the range of enforcement tools, and in fact brings in more appropriate penalties. And I think that's really important because we too often see well-meaning laws or acts of Parliament with little enforceability or inappropriate penalties. If people do offend, then they deserve to feel the full weight of the law and make sure it really is a deterrent. It provides a framework for suitable regulations, and Mr Speaker, the Minister, at the Minister's discretion, is able to bring in regulations as things change. And over time, attitudes to animal welfare changes considerably. We've just gone through the Anzac Day celebrations, and 100 years ago 10,000 horses went off to the First World War, and I can guarantee you the attitude to animal welfare 100 years ago was considerably different to what it is today. And not many of those horses came back, and in the way they were disposed of was perhaps best not focused on too much these days. But those things wouldn't happen in New Zealand of today under the current rules, but they're tightened yet further under the Animal Welfare Amendment Bill. These are complex issues that this bill tackles, and I commend the committee for the work they did on this. It's not easy to deal with these complex issues, but we're not elected to do the easy things. We're elected to make good law and do things that sometimes are a bit tough. And I actually commend both the Minister in particular, but also the committee for tackling these things head on and actually dealing with them in the way that they did. I think it's worth noting that not all New Zealanders, in fact very few New Zealanders, actually deal with farm animals or have any link with farms. Only going back a few generations, most New Zealanders had a direct link to a farm through their family or good friends. Nowadays, most people probably don't have any interaction with farms at all. And farmers deal with animals every day, and the reality of dealing with animals every day is quite different to that interaction people have with a pet. So often seeing what goes on on a farm can be upsetting for some people, but actually having a sheep being shorn, for example, while the sheep doesn't relish the process, it really enjoys getting the wool off its back when it gets outside. Surgical and painful procedures were covered, and it was alluded to earlier in the process. So I've had some feedback from veterinary surgeons in my electorate who were concerned about docking of tails on dogs, and in particular they actually didn't want to see it change because they felt that some dog owners would take that procedure on themselves rather than doing it through a veterinary surgeon with adequate anaesthesia and sterile conditions. And while I have some sympathy with their position, the reality is we don't like that sort of procedure in New Zealand, and it's really got to end. And we do have to draw a line in the sand somewhere, and I'm pleased to see that that has been drawn, that line. There are 16 codes of welfare, animal welfare issued under the Animal Welfare Act and developed by NAWAC. But those codes are being strengthened by new regulations, which I alluded to earlier, and I think that's really important that the regulations will have some teeth rather than just being codes, and I think that's a fantastic innovation. There's been some talk about factory farming, and I think I really want to just mention a little bit about that, Mr Speaker. If we do rush into banning factory farming, so-called, in terms of how we treat hens and farrowing crates, etc., there will be a cost, and the cost will be borne by the consumer. And all we will do is likely see consumers switch to cheaper products that have come in from offshore, and you're simply shifting the animal welfare issue out of the country into another country. So in terms of the animals, you're not really making any difference whatsoever. You may be salving your conscience, but you're not helping animal welfare. So I think it's sensible to have a good lead-in time. The Patoa Farms, which is New Zealand's biggest pork producer, who process 2,000 pigs a week, so they're a significant producer, don't in fact use farrowing crates. But that's taken some time for them to develop that process, and it will take the rest of the industry some time to catch up with those practices. And I think it's quite right and proper that we give them some time to do that. Wild animals and pest management and hunting has been touched on by others, but I just want to speak a little bit about that, Mr Speaker. As a hunter myself, I know that it's easy to be a little flippant about these things, but it's ultimately the aim is to actually kill an animal, but we should be doing it in a way that's humane. And I think it behoves us as human beings at the top of the animal pyramid to treat those animals right and proper. So, Mr Speaker, it's with great pleasure that I commend the Animal Welfare Amendment Bill to the House. Thank you.
Mr Speaker.
I call Mojo Mathis.